My name is Eleanor Winters. I'm 68 years old, and my world tilted on its axis the day I was told I wasn't welcome at my own son's wedding. Before I tell you all about how his fiance's champagne glass shattered on their marble floor at my quiet revelation, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's a comfort to know that stories can travel, that they can find a home in places you've never been. This story, you see, isn't just about a wedding. It's about a secret I kept for 45 years, a legacy I preserved in silence while my own children believed it had been lost to the ravages of a bitter divorce. It's about a lakeside cabin in Pine Ridge and the difference between what the world sees and what is true. It all begins with a photograph. It's a little faded now, the corners softened with time, but the image is as clear as the day it was taken nearly 40 years ago. There I am, a young woman of 25, my hair a little windswept, a smile on my face that doesn't quite reach my eyes. Standing beside me is my son, Michael, just 4 years old, his face a perfect picture of carefree joy. We are outside our family's lakeside cabin in Pine Ridge, a place that felt more like a part of my soul than a piece of property. We were celebrating our last summer vacation there, though Michael didn't know it. My divorce from his father, Richard, was just weeks from being finalized. The worry you see in my eyes in that photograph wasn't just about the end of my marriage. It was about the potential loss of this place, this sanctuary that had been in my family for 3 generations. It was where I'd spent every summer of my childhood, where I'd learned to fish and to identify constellations in the vast dark sky. It was where I had hoped my children and their children would one day create their own hoard of sun-drenched memories. My father, a man with calloused hands and a heart as sturdy as the homes he built, constructed that cabin in 1952. He was a construction foreman, and he poured his life savings and countless weekends into creating something that would outlast him. He wasn't a man of many words, but the ones he chose he polished like river stones. I remember one afternoon, sitting on the edge of the dock as he taught me how to properly bait a hook. He looked out over the still, glassy water and said, "Eleanor, appearances can be deceiving, but ownership is truth. Never surrender what matters most, even when others think you have nothing left." That wisdom, spoken so simply, would become the bedrock of a decision that would shape the next 40 decades of my life in ways neither of us could have ever imagined. I had married young to Richard Winters. He was a charming corporate lawyer, dripping with credentials and hailing from one of the city's most established families. Our wedding was a society affair, a storybook affair featured in the local papers, the school teacher daughter of a construction foreman marrying into wealth and influence. For a time, it was happy. We had Michael, and I dedicated myself to creating a warm and loving home. But as our son turned 3, Richard's career exploded. With the wealth came long absences, missed dinners, and a growing, unspoken distance between us. His excuse was always the same. "It's just one dinner, Eleanor," he'd say, a phrase that became a stand-in for missed birthdays, forgotten anniversaries, and a family life that was slowly eroding. Eventually, I learned that those dinners often included Stephanie, a junior partner at his firm. The divorce that followed was as bitter and public as our wedding had been celebrated. Richard's powerful family and his team of ruthless lawyers used every legal advantage to dismantle our shared life and minimize what I would receive in the settlement. They painted me as a simple woman, incapable of understanding complex finances, a narrative designed to leave me with as little as possible. During one of the mediation sessions, the cabin became a point of contention. "The cabin is non-negotiable," Richard's attorney, a man with a chillingly confident smile, declared. "The property was purchased during the marriage and is a significant asset. It must be liquidated and the proceeds divided." His voice carried the weight of someone who had never lost a case against a woman of my modest means, a woman who was about to be left with little more than a small pension and her dignity. They all sat there, Richard looking on with a feigned expression of regret, his lawyers like vultures circling. They believed they had me cornered. They believed they were taking everything. What none of them knew, what would remain my most carefully guarded secret for the next 45 years, was that I had already secured the one thing that mattered. 3 months before I even filed for divorce, when I knew in my heart that my marriage was beyond repair, I had made a quiet trip to see my old college roommate, Sarah Thompson. Sarah Mao, a brilliant estate attorney,
listened patiently as I laid out my fears. Together, we had quietly and legally transferred the ownership of the lakeside property into a small, private trust established in my maiden name. The legal paperwork, the version Richard's lawyers would later find, was crafted to show that the property had been sold to satisfy other fictitious debts from my side of the family. In reality, I had preserved it, pulling it from Richard's grasp before he even knew it was in jeopardy. "This isn't about deception, Eleanor," Sarah had assured me when I had expressed my doubts, my hands trembling as I signed the papers. "It's about protecting your family's legacy from someone who never truly valued it." After the divorce was finalized, Richard approached me with a look of manufactured sympathy. "I'm so sorry about the cabin, Eleanor," he'd said, his voice smooth as silk. "Some developer will probably tear it down for the land value." I just nodded silently, accepting his condolences for a loss that hadn't actually occurred. I let him believe he had won, that he had stripped me of my heritage. And in that moment, I learned a powerful lesson. Sometimes silence is the strongest shield you have. It protects what matters most. In the difficult years that followed the divorce, I built a new life for Michael and myself. We moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment crosstown, a world away from the sprawling home that we had shared with Richard. I returned to teaching high school English, a career I had abandoned at Richard's insistence during our marriage. He called it a noble but small profession, a hobby that didn't fit the image of a corporate lawyer's wife. To me, it was a calling. It was a world of substance, of shaping young minds, and it was a world I was grateful to return to. Money was undoubtedly tight. A teacher's salary, even a veteran one, was modest, and raising a son on my own required careful budgeting. My colleagues at the high school, many of them single mothers or women supporting their families, often marveled at my resourcefulness. "Eleanor, you could stretch $1 into a mile," my friend and fellow teacher Sophia Chen would often say, shaking her head in admiration as I packed my lunch every day and found creative ways to afford Michael's school trips.
They never knew my secret. They never knew that a significant portion of my modest salary, money that could have gone toward a nicer apartment or a newer car, was being quietly funneled toward property taxes and maintenance fees for a lakeside cabin they all believed had been sold off and likely demolished years ago. The deception weighed on me, especially when it came to Michael. What my son never knew was that every summer, while he was shipped off to Europe for lavish holidays with his father and his new family, Stephanie and their 2 children, I would take my 2 precious weeks of vacation and drive to Pine Ridge. Those weeks were my sanctuary and my responsibility. I'd arrive at the cabin, my small car filled with cleaning supplies, tools, and groceries, and I would work. I'd inspect the roof my father had so carefully laid, check the hand-hewn beams for any signs of stress, and repaint the green shutters whenever they began to fade. I maintained it quietly, meticulously, preserving it for a future I prayed would one day include grandchildren building sandcastles on the same shore where I had played as a child. I was the silent steward of our family's history. The lies, even half-truths, were bitter on my tongue. "Mom, why don't we ever go to the lake anymore?" a 10-year-old Michael asked me once, his mind holding on to fractured, sunny memories from before the divorce. I remember my heart clenching in my chest. I knelt down to look him in the eye, the scent of his freshly washed hair filling my senses. "That's gone now, sweetheart," I replied, the words feeling like a betrayal. "But we'll make new memories together, you and I." I justified the deception with a promise I made to myself in the quiet of the night. One day, when he was older, when he could understand the complexities of the world and the bitterness of my divorce, I would reveal everything. I would walk him through the cabin, show him the photograph of us from that last summer, and pass the keys to him, just as my father would have intended. It was a dream I held on to, a beacon that guided me through the lonely years. As Michael grew older, however, a subtle but undeniable shift occurred. He began to absorb his father's values, his worldview. The summer visits to Europe, funded by Richard, became semester abroad programs and eventually an international business degree, all financed through Richard's family connections. The world of my modest apartment and public school teacher's salary began to look small and provincial to him. Our phone conversations during his college years grew shorter, less frequent. When he did visit, I could see him glancing around my small home with a mixture of embarrassment and pity. His world was one of corporate suites and five-star hotels. Mine was one of well-loved books and handmade quilts. "You could do better than this, Mom," he once suggested shortly after landing his first high-paying finance job. He stood in the middle of my living room, his expensive suit looking out of place against my worn but comfortable armchair. "I know some excellent financial advisors. They could help you maximize your teacher's pension, maybe get you into a nicer place." The irony was a sharp, painful thing. My son, worried about my financial situation, had no idea I was secretly maintaining a valuable, debt-free lakeside property. A property worth more than his annual salary. I just smiled, a practiced, gentle expression I had perfected over the years. "Thank you for your concern, Michael. I'm quite content." I watched with a painful blend of pride and apprehension as the curious, warm-hearted boy who collected pine cones at our cabin transformed into a polished young professional who measured success in acquisitions and appearances. This transformation was accelerated by his girlfriend, soon-to-be fiancée, Vanessa. Vanessa came from a family remarkably similar to Richard's. Old money, socially connected, and deeply invested in appearances. From our first meeting, it was clear she viewed my life with a sort of detached curiosity, as if I were a quaint character from a historical novel. "She tells me you were quite the hostess in your day," she commented during our first meeting, her tone suggesting that my life of substance and service had ended the day my marriage to a wealthy man did. I simply smiled and offered her another cup of tea. But I could never have anticipated how completely these clashing values would drive a wedge between my son and me. I never imagined that the cabin, the symbol of my secret strength and enduring love, would eventually become the centerpiece of a family confrontation that would shatter every illusion we had ever built. The first real sign that Vanessa viewed me not as future family, but as a social inconvenience, came during their engagement party. The invitation arrived on heavy, cream-colored cardstock formally addressed to Mrs. Eleanor Winters. Tucked inside was a handwritten note from Vanessa, her script a series of perfect, sharp angles. It read, "We're keeping it intimate and sophisticated. No need to bring anything but yourself." The subtext was clear. My homemade offerings, which I often brought to gatherings, were not welcome here. The evening of the party, I chose my outfit with care. I wore a simple, elegant blue dress I'd recently bought for the school's retirement ceremony, accessorized with my mother's pearl necklace. It was modest, appropriate, and wholly me. The moment I arrived at the sprawling mansion with its manicured lawns and uniformed valet parking, the chasm between my world and the one my son now inhabited felt vast and insurmountable. "Mom, you made it," he greeted me in the soaring marble foyer. He gave me a quick, almost fleeting kiss on the cheek. His eyes darted over my simple dress, a flicker of assessment in their depths, before he added, "Vanessa's parents in their circle are by the main bar. It's a bit loud. Maybe you'd be more comfortable on the garden terrace where it's quieter." This subtle redirection, this gentle steering away from the center of power wasn't new. Over the 3 years of their relationship, I had grown accustomed to being positioned at the quiet edges of their social events. I was the charming retired teacher, a quaint anecdote for their sophisticated friends, but not someone to be placed in the main current of conversation with the international travelers and finance professionals who made up their inner circle. What stung was Michael's growing comfort with this arrangement. He was no longer just tolerating it. He was facilitating it. Later that evening, standing near the ridiculously large champagne fountain that dominated the room, I overheard my son talking to an elegant older couple. Eleanor, yes, my mother, he was explaining, his tone the same one he might use to describe an exotic but impractical lifestyle choice. She dedicated her life to teaching, a real unsung hero, even if her world has been somewhat limited. How admirable that she found fulfillment in such modest work, the woman replied, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she patted Michael's arm. And how fortunate she must feel to see you achieve so much more.
We all follow different paths, Michael responded smoothly, raising his glass in a toast. I'm just grateful I can ensure her comfort now that she's retired. The irony struck me with the force of a physical blow. My son, who believed he needed to ensure my comfort, had no idea that I owned a property whose value could have funded his entire international education. He had no clue that for decades my modest work had supported not just the two of us, but the secret preservation of his own heritage. The deeper pain, however, came from hearing him describe my life's work, my deliberate, purposeful choice to serve and to teach, as a limitation. He saw my substance as a lack of his kind of success. These moments multiplied in the months leading up to the wedding. Michael and Vanessa purchased a luxury condominium in the city's most exclusive high-rise, and my invitations to visit became rare and highly choreographed events. During one such visit, as we sat in their immaculate living room, surrounded by curated art and overlooking the city, Vanessa remarked, "Michael mentions you never traveled much, Eleanor. We're planning to spend at least a month abroad every year. I can't imagine being so rooted." I smiled politely, my mind drifting to the quiet mornings I'd spent at the cabin, watching the mist rise off the lake, the spectacular blaze of autumn colors reflected in its waters. I thought of the profound peace that comes from deeply knowing and loving one place. There are different kinds of richness, I suppose, was all I said, unwilling to defend my life choices to someone so clearly uninterested in understanding them. My retirement, after 32 years of teaching, coincided with their wedding planning, and the collision of these two life events threw Michael's new value system into sharp relief. My retirement party was a modest affair in the high school library, filled with colleagues, former students, and the warm glow of a life well lived in service to others. Michael arrived late and left early, his discomfort palpable in a room so far removed from the prestigious circles he now moved into. As we walked to the parking lot afterward, he said, "You could do so much more now, Mom. Travel, take some courses, maybe even move to a nicer apartment." "I'm happy with my life, Michael," I replied, a gentle rebuke in my tone that he completely missed. Not everyone needs external validation to feel fulfilled. He frowned. "It's not about validation, it's about quality of life. Dad mentioned he could help you with some investments if you're worried about your pension." The mention of Richard, his father who had been a ghost in our lives for decades, paying the required child support but offering nothing else, offering to guide me financially, felt like a profound betrayal. That Michael now saw his father as a financial authority to manage my life stung more than he could ever know. The final act of this slow, painful drama began 3 months before the wedding. Vanessa invited me to lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown. It was our first one-on-one meeting without Michael present, and the formality of it put me on high alert. After the waiter had taken our orders, she began, her voice carrying the practiced diplomacy of someone delivering a prepared speech. "Eleanor, I wanted to talk to you about the wedding arrangements." "Of course," I replied, my expression pleasant. "I've booked my flights and accommodations. Everything is set." "That's actually what I wanted to discuss," she said, toying with her water glass, her gaze not quite meeting mine. "Michael and I have been finalizing the guest list, and, well, with his father bringing so many business associates and with my family's connections, the event has grown considerably in scope." I waited, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I knew where this was going. The thing is, she continued, a note of rehearsed concern in her voice, we're creating a very specific aesthetic for the weekend. The resort has a certain exclusivity we're trying to maintain. We're concerned that you might feel uncomfortable among so many high-profile guests. I've attended many types of events in my life, Vanessa, I replied, my voice perfectly even. I am quite capable of conducting myself in any setting. She offered a tight, forced smile. Of course you are. That's not what I meant. It's just, Michael's father is hosting a significant number of business connections who are very important to Michael's future. The dynamic could be complicated with you there, given the history. The real message, stripped of its diplomatic dressing, was brutally clear. My presence at my own son's wedding was an inconvenience, a potential embarrassment, a complication to the perfect image they wished to project. I took a slow breath, my heart pounding against my ribs. Are you suggesting I shouldn't attend my son's wedding? I asked directly, cutting through the pretense. Not at all, she replied quickly, though her eyes told a different story. We're just suggesting that perhaps you might be more comfortable celebrating with us when we return in a more intimate setting. We could have a special dinner, just the three of us. I was being uninvited from my only child's wedding. I see, I said finally, my mind already racing, already shifting from hurt to strategy. And does Michael share this perspective? Her hesitation was all the answer I needed. He understands the complexities of the situation. It was actually his father who pointed out how awkward the seating arrangements might be. Michael agreed it might be for the best. In that moment, sitting across from the woman who would soon be my daughter-in-law, I realized that the cabin, my secret sanctuary, had taken on a new and urgent significance. What had begun as an act of preservation had now become a symbol of my very existence, my refusal to be erased from my own family's story. I gathered my purse, the lunch on my plate untouched. Please let Michael know I'd like to speak with him directly, I said, my voice calm and firm. Some conversations shouldn't happen through intermediaries. As I drove home, the initial wave of pain began to recede, replaced by a strange, cold clarity. A plan began to form. A plan that would force my son to confront not just my rightful place in his life, but the values he had so carelessly abandoned. The cabin that had remained my secret for 45 years was about to become the centerpiece of a long overdue reckoning. The day after my lunch with Vanessa, I initiated what I privately termed my family recovery plan. The hurt and anger were still there, a churning sea in my chest, but above it all, I felt a powerful clarity of purpose. If my son and his fiancée believed they could write me out of the most important day of his life based on social appearances and Richard's comfort, then it was time to reevaluate what would happen to the family legacy I had sacrificed so much to preserve. My first call was Sarah Thompson. 45 years had passed since we were college roommates, but our bond remained as strong as ever. Now, a senior partner at her prestigious law firm, specializing in estate planning, Sarah had been the silent guardian of my secret, maintaining the legal structure of the Harrison Trust through the decades, ensuring it remained protected and private.
I met her in her downtown office, a space of quiet wealth with leather-bound books and a sweeping city view. It was a world away from my high school library, a reminder of our different paths, yet our friendship had always bridged that gap. "This is unexpected, Eleanor," she said, after I explained the situation, her brow furrowed with concern. "You've maintained that trust for one reason and one reason only, to pass the cabin to Michael someday. Are you certain you want to change that now?" "I'm not certain of anything yet," I admitted, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. But I need to understand my options. If my son doesn't want me at his wedding, perhaps he doesn't deserve the family legacy either. A legacy he knows nothing about. Sarah nodded, her expression shifting from friendly concern to professional focus. Legally, your position is ironclad. The property has remained in the trust with you as the sole trustee and beneficiary. You have complete authority to determine its future. You can sell it, donate it, or let it fall into the sea if you wish. But, she paused, her eyes meeting mine with the insight of a long friendship. This isn't really about legal options, is it? This is about something deeper. It's about recognition, I said, the word hanging in the air. Not just of my rights, but of my place, of my very existence. If I'm not important enough for his wedding, why should he benefit from the decades of my life I poured into preserving something for his future? What exactly do you want to know? Sarah asked, picking up a pen. First, I began, the questions that had haunted my sleepless night now taking form. I need to know what Richard and Michael actually know, or think they know. Has Richard ever mentioned the cabin? Does Michael have any inkling that it still exists in our family? That will require some discreet investigation, Sarah noted, making a note on her legal pad. I have channels. I can make inquiries that won't raise any suspicions. Second, I continued, feeling a surge of strength, I need to know my options for the property itself. What would the process look like to sell it, or to donate it to a conservation group? I want everything on the table. We spent the next hour outlining a strategy. Sarah would conduct her quiet investigation, and I would drive out to Pine Ridge to assess the cabin's current condition and get a sense of its market value. Not because I truly intended to sell it, but because I needed to arm myself with information. 3 days later, I made the 2-hour drive to Pine Ridge. This trip felt different from my yearly maintenance visits. It was weighted with purpose and with the painful possibility of a final goodbye. The spring afternoon was perfect, sunlight dappling through the pine trees as I turned onto the familiar gravel road. The cabin sat just as it always had, its weathered cedar siding and forest green shutters a testament to my father's craftsmanship and my decades of silent care. I walked through the rooms, a ghost in my own life, cataloging memories. Here was the spot on the dock where a 6-year-old Michael finally learned to swim. There was the cast iron stove where my father taught me to make his famous fluffy pancakes. This was the reading nook where my mother's gentle voice would fill rainy afternoons with poetry. This wasn't just a structure. It was the physical archive of our family's history. The thought of strangers owning it, of their laughter echoing where my family's once had, created a physical ache in my chest. Yet the thought of gifting it to a son who saw me as an embarrassment was equally painful. I spent the night, sitting on the dock as the stars emerged, their reflections shivering on the still, black water. By morning, a tentative decision had formed in my mind, one that would hinge on what Sarah's investigation uncovered. A week later, Sarah called. Her voice was taut. I've spoken with several sources, including a former law partner of Richard's who handled some of his early estate planning. It appears Richard has always maintained the narrative that the cabin was sold during the divorce. He's mentioned it to Michael over the years, usually as an example of a valuable asset that had to be liquidated during the settlement. So, Michael is certain it's long gone, I confirmed, a strange mixture of relief and sadness washing over me. Yes, Sarah said, but there's more, and you need to sit down for this part, Eleanor. I sat. According to my source, she continued, Michael and Vanessa have been looking at property in Pine Ridge for the past 6 months. My blood ran cold. What? Apparently, Richard told them that he had a lead on a unique property. He said the old family cabin site would be coming up for sale soon, and he thought it would make an incredibly meaningful wedding gift if they could reclaim it for the family. The implications struck me with the force of a lightning bolt. He knows, Sarah. Richard knows I still own it.
It seems almost certain, she confirmed. Property records are public, even if the trust structure obscures the direct connection to you. Someone with Richard's resources and legal savvy could have easily figured it out. The timing suggests he planned to buy it from your trust, perhaps through an anonymous third party, and then present it to Michael after the wedding, painting himself as the hero who recovered the lost family property. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it stole my breath. After 45 years, Richard had uncovered my secret and was planning to weaponize it for his own glory, recasting himself as the preserver of a family legacy he had tried to destroy. There's one more thing, Sarah added, her voice hesitant. According to my source, Vanessa has been very explicit about her plans for the property if they acquire it. I held my breath. She intends to tear down the existing cabin and build a modern glass and steel lake house more suitable for entertaining Richard's business associates. The final piece clicked into place. Not only was I being excluded from my own son's wedding, but the very legacy I had protected through decades of sacrifice was to be demolished. My father's handiwork, my family's history, was to be bulldozed and replaced by a monument to the very values that had destroyed my marriage and poisoned my son. Thank you, Sarah, I said, my voice eerily calm. My resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. I was preparing for a confrontation I never wanted but could no longer avoid. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved with a methodical precision that surprised even myself. The emotional turmoil was still there, a constant hum beneath the surface, but it was now channeled into a singular, focused purpose. I was preparing for a confrontation I never wanted but could no longer avoid. First, I gathered my arsenal of truth. With Sarah's help, I compiled a comprehensive dossier. It included the original trust documents establishing the Eleanor Jameson Trust, using my maiden name, dated 3 months before my divorce from Richard was finalized. It contained 45 years of property tax receipts, each one paid on time from my modest teacher's salary. It had maintenance records spanning the decades, a new roof in 1989, updated plumbing in 1998, new electrical wiring in 2007, receipts for paint, lumber, and the services of Harold Jenkins, the local caretaker who had helped me with the heavier tasks over the years.
Then I added the photographs, not the old, faded ones of my childhood, but recent images, pictures I had taken during my summer visits showing the cabin in pristine condition. There was a photo of the garden shed my father had built, which I had repainted just last year in the same forest green he had chosen. There was a shot of the interior, with a book I had been reading left on the side table, and fresh curtains I had sewn myself hanging in the windows. It was undeniable proof of my continuous, loving presence. Most importantly, I prepared myself emotionally. This wasn't just about a property dispute. It was about resetting my relationship with my only child. The evidence pointed to a level of cold calculation that couldn't be brushed aside as a simple misunderstanding. Michael had not only agreed to exclude me from his wedding, but was also complicit in a plan to profit from a legacy he believed had been unjustly taken from his father. He was about to receive a lesson in a different kind of inheritance. The inheritance of consequences. The final element of my plan was the most difficult, the one that felt like tearing a part of my own heart out. Working with Sarah, I drafted the documents that would officially remove Michael as the eventual beneficiary of the Harrison Trust. In his place, I established provisions to donate the property, upon my death, to the Pine Ridge Environmental Conservancy. The agreement would ensure that the cabin and the surrounding land would be preserved in its natural state, never to be developed. It would be protected forever from the kind of glass and steel monument Vanessa had envisioned. "Are you absolutely certain this is what you want, Eleanor?" Sarah asked gently as she slid the papers across the polished mahogany of her desk. The weight of the moment was immense. Once executed, this decision permanently changes the succession plan. I hesitated, the pen poised over the signature line. For a fleeting second,
The face of the 4-year-old boy in the photograph flashed in my mind, the son I had raised, the future I had dreamed of for him in that cabin. I have spent 45 years preserving this cabin for a son who now finds me too embarrassing to include in his wedding. He and his fiancée are planning to tear down my father's work to build a party house. I need him to understand that a family legacy isn't a trinket you can dismiss when it's inconvenient and then reclaim when it's advantageous. It is earned through respect and love, not entitlement. And if he reacts with genuine remorse, Sarah pressed, ever the devil's advocate, if this serves as the wake-up call you hope it might be? This was my deepest hope, the flicker of light in the darkness, that this painful truth might somehow reclaim the son I had raised, the boy who existed before Richard's values had reshaped him. Let's add a contingency clause, I decided, a new idea taking shape. The donation to the Conservancy doesn't become irrevocable until either my death or 1 year from the date Michael is officially notified, whichever comes later. Sarah nodded, a small, approving smile on her face. A window, a chance for redemption. Wise, as always, Eleanor. She made the notation. The door was left slightly ajar. I signed the documents. The ink was black and final. My secret weapon was ready. As if on cue, the following weekend, Michael called. His voice was laced with a forced casualness that immediately set my teeth on edge. Hey, Mom. Vanessa and I were thinking of having you over for dinner at our place on Saturday. Just a small gathering. We have some wedding updates to discuss with you. How thoughtful, Michael, I replied with matching his light tone. I knew exactly what updates they planned to share. They were going to formalize my exclusion, likely with some patronizing offer of a special post-wedding dinner. They were setting the stage for their grand announcement about reclaiming the cabin, my cabin. Saturday at 7 works perfectly for me, I said. This dinner would indeed provide the setting for our confrontation, but it would be one that neither Michael nor Vanessa could possibly anticipate. As I prepared for the evening, I felt a strange sense of calm. I selected a simple but elegant navy dress and my mother's pearl earrings, the same outfit I had worn to their engagement party. I was no longer the woman seeking their approval, but a woman about to reclaim her own narrative. Into my handbag, I placed a slim manila envelope. Inside were 3 items: the formal notification of the changes to the Harrison Trust, a few of the recent photographs of the cabin, and most importantly, a certified copy of the deed proving my uninterrupted ownership across 4 decades. These papers represented more than just a piece of real estate. They were the tangible proof of a truth I had protected for longer than my son had been alive. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that always made the lake at Pine Ridge shimmer like polished glass. As I drove to Michael's condominium in the exclusive River Point Tower, I rehearsed not accusations, but simple, undeniable truth. When Michael opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the dining table set for 3 and a bottle of expensive champagne chilling in a silver bucket. They were actually planning to toast to my removal from their lives. The thought didn't even sting anymore. It simply affirmed the rightness of my actions. Mom, you look nice, Michael commented, his eyes doing a quick, surprised assessment. The subtle surprise in his tone suggested he'd expected me to arrive looking dowdy and defeated. Another small, telling indication of how completely he had misunderstood the woman who raised him. Thank you, Michael, I replied with a warm smile that revealed nothing. I'm looking forward to hearing your wedding updates. As I took my seat at their glass dining table with its spectacular, glittering view of the city, I couldn't help but contrast it with the rough-hewn wooden table at the cabin, a table scarred with the history of 4 generations. One was designed to impress visitors, the other was built to nurture connection. The difference seemed to encapsulate everything that had gone wrong between us. Vanessa emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter of appetizers that looked more like art than food. "Ilunar, so glad you could join us," she said with a practiced charm that didn't reach her eyes. "We have some very exciting developments to share about the wedding." She poured the champagne into 3 delicate flutes. I raised my glass, ready for the conversation that would change everything. The cabin I had protected for 45 years was about to emerge from the shadows, and with it, a long overdue reckoning with what a legacy is truly worth. "A toast," Michael declared, raising his champagne flute. The city lights glittered behind him, a backdrop of cold, distant stores.
The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. I gently touched my glass to theirs, a silent observer in their carefully orchestrated play. Vanessa's smile was a fixed, perfect curve as she took a delicate sip, her eyes gleaming with the news she was clearly bursting to share. "Mom," Michael began, setting his glass down with a practiced precision that was painfully reminiscent of Richard, "we wanted to talk to you about some adjustments to our wedding plans." I nodded encouragingly, my expression serene. I would let them walk themselves to the edge of the cliff before I revealed there was no ground beneath their feet. My own revelation could wait until they had fully and irrevocably committed to theirs. "As you know, the resort in Santorini is very exclusive, very intimate," he continued, the words sounding rehearsed. "We've had to make some difficult decisions about the guest list to accommodate some of Dad's key business associates, people who can really open doors for my career." Vanessa leaned forward, her expression a masterclass in feigned concern. "What Michael is trying to say, Eleanor, is that the dynamics with Richard's family and business connections, they create certain complexities." I decided to spare them the rest of their convoluted justifications. "You're uninviting me to the wedding," I stated calmly, not as a question, but as a fact. "Vanessa already explained this to me at lunch last week." Michael's composure flickered. Surprise, then a flash of embarrassment, quickly replaced by relief. He was off the hook. "It's not uninviting, Mom," he corrected, his tone condescendingly gentle. "It's recognizing that the situation might be uncomfortable for everyone. We're thinking of your comfort, too." "My comfort?" I repeated softly, letting the absurdity of the phrase hang in the air. "Exactly," Vanessa interjected, seizing the opportunity. "And to show you how much we value you and how important family legacy is to us, Dad has been working on something special, a surprise, really." She glanced at Michael, who nodded, his excitement returning. "Dad has located our old family cabin at Pine Ridge, the one that was sold during your divorce. He's in negotiations to buy it back for us as our wedding gift. Isn't that incredible? We're going to rebuild it, create a new family place for new memories." "Tear it down and rebuild," Vanessa clarified, her own excitement making her less guarded. "The existing structure is charming, but so dated. We're working with an architect who specializes in luxury lake properties. It's going to be magnificent." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. The liquid was cold and sharp on my tongue. The audacity of their plan to present the demolition of my father's life's work as a heartfelt gift to me was breathtaking. "That's certainly unexpected," I managed, placing my glass carefully on the table. "May I ask when Richard discovered this property was available?" Michael looked momentarily confused by my question. A few months ago, I think. He has connections in real estate who keep an eye out for opportunities." "Why does that matter?" "It's just interesting timing." "And he's certain this is the same property, the original family cabin?" "Absolutely," Michael confirmed, full of confidence. "He showed me the listing photos. It looks just like I remember from when I was little, just more weathered. The stone fireplace, the green shutters, it's definitely our old place. The interior needs to be completely gutted, of course," he added, echoing Vanessa's earlier sentiment. I nodded thoughtfully, my hand moving to my purse where the envelope of truth was waiting. "And this generous gift," I said, looking from my son to his fiancée,
is meant as a consolation for my absence at your wedding." Michael had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That's not how I'd put it, Mom. It's about creating something positive, focusing on the future instead of my presence at my only child's wedding," I finished for him. An awkward silence descended. Vanessa busied herself rearranging an already perfect napkin. Michael shifted in his chair, visibly struggling. "Mom," he finally said, his tone shifting to the patient voice one uses with a difficult child, "we're trying to make the best of a complicated situation. The potential for awkwardness is significant." "More significant than the absence of your mother?" I stated again as a simple fact of their priorities. "That's not fair," Michael protested, a flash of the boy I once knew visible beneath the polished corporate exterior. The moment had arrived. I reached for my purse, my movements slow and deliberate. I retrieved the envelope of truth and placed it on the glass table between us. It made a soft, definitive sound in the quiet room. "Before we discuss this any further," I said, my voice perfectly even, "there is something you both should know about the family cabin at Pine Ridge." Michael's face registered confusion. "What about it?" "Open this," I instructed gently. He hesitated, then reached for the envelope. He slid out the contents. I watched his face as he examined the first document, the original deed showing the creation of the Eleanor Trust, dated 3 months before the divorce. His brow furrowed. He turned to the second set of papers, 45 years of property tax receipts, all paid by the same trust, all sent to my modest apartment's address. Then came the third stack, maintenance receipts, a new roof in 1989, updated plumbing in 1998, the invoices from Harold Jenkins. Finally, he reached the photographs, recent, clear images of the cabin in excellent condition, the freshly painted green shutters, the book on the side table, the curtains I had sewn. "I don't understand," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. He looked up from the documents, his eyes wide with confusion, so profound that it was almost comical. "These look like—" "Mom, are you saying you've owned the cabin all this time?" "Yes," I confirmed simply. "I never lost it in the divorce. I created a private trust to protect it before the proceedings even began. For 45 years, I have maintained it, preserved it, and kept it exactly as your grandfather built it, while allowing you and your father to believe it had been sold." The sound that followed was sharp and violent. Vanessa's champagne glass slipped from her nerveless fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Shards of crystal skittered across the polished surface. Neither of us moved. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, her carefully constructed composure completely gone. "That's not possible," Michael insisted, his hands shuffling through the papers again as if they might change their story. "Your father discovered the trust about 6 months ago," I explained calmly. "His real estate connections likely noticed the similarity between the trust's name and my maiden name. Instead of approaching me, a woman he believed was financially naive, he apparently concocted this grand plan to recover it for you, after which you would tear down everything your grandfather built." Michael's face cycled through a kaleidoscope of emotions: confusion, disbelief, dawning realization, and finally, shame. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "All these years, why didn't you tell me?" It was the question I had anticipated, the one I had prepared for. "At first, it was about protection," I began. "The divorce was bitter. Your father was determined to take everything. It was the only way to preserve what mattered most. Later, I kept it as a gift, a legacy to pass on to you when you were old enough to appreciate it." "So what is this now?" Vanessa finally spoke, her voice sharp, cutting through the stunned silence. "What are you doing with it?" I reached back into my purse and withdrew the final document, the one I had signed in Sarah's office. I placed it on the table on top of the shattered glass. "For 45 years, the trust has specified that upon my death, ownership would transfer to my son," I said, looking directly at Michael. His expression softened slightly at this. But now, I've amended the trust. In light of recent events, specifically being told I am not welcome at my only child's wedding, I have designated a new beneficiary. I let the words land with the weight they deserved. The Pine Ridge Environmental Conservancy will inherit the property. The cabin and the land will be preserved in perpetuity, never to be developed or significantly altered from my father's original design. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the city below. My son, my daughter-in-law-to-be, and the ghost of their shattered plans were finally face to face with a truth they never saw coming. The silence in the room stretched, taut and heavy. Vanessa stared at the shattered glass on the floor as if seeing a metaphor for her own meticulously crafted plans. Michael just sat there, holding the photographs of the cabin, his thumb unconsciously tracing the outline of the roof his grandfather had built. "You're punishing me," he finally said, his voice low and laced with an edge of Richard's familiar entitlement. "Because we ask for a simple wedding accommodation, you're taking away a family legacy." "No, Michael," I replied, my composure a steel shield. My heart ached at his interpretation, but I would not let it show. "I am not punishing you, Michael. I am acknowledging that we seem to have very different definitions of what family and legacy mean. If I am not considered important enough to be included in your life's most significant day, then perhaps my family's legacy is not something that belongs in your future." "That's manipulative," Vanessa interjected, finding her voice. It was sharp, accusatory. "You're using this property to force your way into our wedding." I turned my calm gaze to her. "I am not forcing anything, Vanessa. I am making a decision about my own property, a property I have paid for and cared for with my own two hands for 45 years. I am making a decision based on the values and actions demonstrated by the people involved. You made your choice about my place in your celebration. I have simply made mine about the future of my family's legacy." Michael stood abruptly, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows. He stared out at the city, his back to me. When he turned around, his expression had hardened into something chillingly familiar. It was the look Richard used to get during our divorce proceedings. Calculating, assessing leverage, searching for a weakness. "We can challenge this legally," he stated, the words cold and clipped. The deception, the hidden asset during the divorce, Dad's lawyers would have a field day with this. The threat might have wounded me once. Now it bounced harmlessly off the armor of my preparation. The trust was created legally, 3 months before the divorce proceedings began. It was never a marital asset to be hidden. Your father's attorneys are welcome to try, of course. My lawyer is Sarah Thompson. I believe you know her reputation. She is now a senior partner at Jacobson & Reed, specializing in trust law. She has maintained impeccable records for 45 years. Any challenge would be difficult, expensive, and potentially very embarrassing for your father. The mention of one of the city's most prestigious and feared law firms gave Michael visible pause. He knew his father had connections, but Sarah's expertise in this specific area was legendary. The fight would not be the easy victory he envisioned. I decided to offer the small branch I had prepared. "There is one element of the amendment that might interest you," I continued into the tense silence. "The transfer to the Conservancy doesn't become irrevocable until one of two things happens: my death or 1 year from today, whichever comes later." "A year?" Vanessa clarified, her tone bitter. "So you're giving us a year to change our wedding plans, or you'll give the property away forever?" "I'm offering a year for reflection," I corrected gently. A year for perspectives to evolve. On both sides. I have preserved that cabin not as a bargaining chip, but as a labor of love. If the future of that legacy no longer includes me at significant family moments, then perhaps the legacy itself should follow a different path. With that, I stood up, gathering my purse. Take all the time you need, I said. The 1-year window has just begun. As I walked towards the door, I saw Vanessa frozen beside the wreckage of her champagne glass, her carefully constructed world in fragments at her feet. Michael followed me to the entryway. His face was a complex storm of anger, confusion, and something else, something that might have been a grudging respect. You never knew I had this in you, Mom. This level of calculation, he said quietly, his hand on the doorknob. I paused and looked directly into his eyes, seeing for a moment the boy he had been beneath the man Richard had shaped. There's a great deal you don't know about me, Michael, I replied with a sad smile touching my lips. Perhaps the real tragedy is that you never thought to ask. The drive home was quiet. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt weary, but also strangely light. For the first time in decades, our relationship, whatever was left of it, would have to proceed from a place of truth, however painful that truth might be. The week that followed was a vacuum of silence. No calls, no messages. I moved through my days with an outward calm, volunteering at the library, tending my garden, but inwardly, I was in turmoil. Had I destroyed the last bridge to my only child? Then, 10 days after the confrontation, a text message appeared on my phone from an unexpected source. Eleanor, this is Vanessa. I'd like to speak with you privately. Coffee tomorrow at the Riverside Cafe, 10 a.m. The message was so surprising, I had to read it 3 times. What could she possibly want to discuss without Michael? Was this a peace offering? Or another more desperate attempt at negotiation? I typed back a simple agreement. The Riverside Cafe was neutral territory, not one of the upscale establishments Vanessa favored, nor one of my cozy neighborhood spots. When I arrived, I saw her immediately at a corner table. She was dressed more casually than I had ever seen her, in simple jeans and a blouse, her usual mask of perfect makeup noticeably absent. She looked tired, and for the first time, vulnerable. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down. The practiced charm was gone. Is Michael joining us? I asked. No, she answered quickly. He doesn't know I'm here. We've been having some difficult conversations since that night. She fidgeted with her coffee cup. I needed to speak with you, woman to woman. I waited.
First, she began, the words coming with visible effort, I want to apologize for how I handled the wedding, for that lunch. It was cowardly and cruel. I should have pushed back harder when Richard suggested it would be cleaner if you weren't there. The admission surprised me. It was Richard's specific suggestion? Vanessa nodded, a flicker of anger in her eyes. He framed it as concern for everyone's comfort. Looking back, especially now that I know about the cabin, I see his motives were not what he claimed. She took a deep breath. Eleanor, I was raised in a world where appearances are everything. My entire life has been about social harmony, about not making waves. When Richard raised concerns, it triggered all my conditioning. It was wrong, and I'm sorry. It was the most genuine thing I had ever heard her say. After you left that night, Michael and I had the first real fight of our relationship. He was furious about the cabin, about being denied what he saw as his inheritance.
But when I suggested we could just use the year to include you in the wedding and secure the property, he became even more upset. This shocked me. He didn't want to reconsider? That's what shocked me too, Vanessa admitted. He said, "This isn't about the damn cabin anymore. It's about the fact that my mother has been living a completely different life than I thought for 45 years. It's about the fact that the modest, simple woman I've been dismissing as naive has been executing a sophisticated legal and financial strategy since before I was born." Hearing my son's words quoted back to me was a complex blow. Pain at his anger, but also a tiny, sharp glimmer of hope. He was finally seeing me. "I asked him a question," Vanessa said, her eyes meeting mine directly. "I asked if he was more upset about you having a secret or about him not getting the property. His answer, his inability to answer, made me realize I don't know the man I'm planning to marry as well as I thought." She took a deep breath. "Eleanor, I was raised in a world where appearances are everything. My entire life has been about social harmony, about not making waves. When Richard raised concerns, it triggered all my conditioning. It was wrong, and I'm sorry." It was the most genuine thing I had ever heard her say. "After you left that night, Michael and I had the first real fight of our relationship. He was furious about the cabin, about being denied what he saw as his inheritance. But when I suggested we could just use the year to include you in the wedding and secure the property, he became even more upset. This shocked me. He didn't want to reconsider? That's what shocked me too, Vanessa admitted. He said, "This isn't about the damn cabin anymore. It's about the fact that my mother has been living a completely different life than I thought for 45 years. It's about the fact that the modest, simple woman I've been dismissing as naive has been executing a sophisticated legal and financial strategy since before I was born." Hearing my son's words quoted back to me was a complex blow. Pain at his anger, but also a tiny, sharp glimmer of hope. He was finally seeing me. "I asked him a question," Vanessa said, her eyes meeting mine directly. "I asked if he was more upset about you having a secret or about him not getting the property. His answer, his inability to answer, made me realize I don't know the man I'm planning to marry as well as I thought." She paused, then shared something deeply personal about her own parents, about her father prioritizing business over family, and her mother arranging her life around his ambitions. When Michael couldn't answer me, I saw my parents' marriage reflected back at me, and it terrified me. The confession created an unexpected bridge between us. "I've made a decision," Vanessa said, her voice firming with new resolve. "With or without Michael's agreement, I am not having a wedding where his mother isn't welcome. I've already contacted the resort in Santorini. I've canceled the reservation." "You canceled the wedding?" I asked, alarmed. "Not the marriage," she clarified quickly, "just the event. If Michael still wants to marry me, it will have to be something different, something that honors authentic family, not business opportunities." The courage this took impressed me deeply. For a woman from her world, this was a monumental act of rebellion. "Before I tell him," she said, leaning forward, "I needed to ask you something. The trust amendment. If we create a wedding that truly includes you, would you consider reversing it?" The directness of the question hung in the air. "Is that why you're here, Vanessa? To negotiate?" She had the grace to look ashamed. 6 days ago, it would have been, she admitted with stunning candor. "But something has changed in me. After you left, I stayed up all night looking at those photographs you brought. The care, the preservation of something authentic. It's the opposite of everything I've been taught to value." She pulled out her phone. "I've been researching the Pine Ridge Environmental Conservancy. Their mission is beautiful. If you donate the cabin, it will be protected forever. There's a beauty in that too." She was no longer negotiating. She was trying to understand. I want a different kind of life, Eleanor. I want to understand the woman who loved something enough to protect it quietly for 45 years without needing any credit or recognition. I think I want more of what you value in my life. As we parted ways outside the cafe, she surprised me with a brief, sincere hug. Thank you for meeting me, and for maintaining that cabin. Whatever happens, I'm grateful to understand the kind of woman my children might have as a grandmother someday. The mention of grandchildren, a future I had begun to fear might never include me, caught me completely off guard. As I drove home, I felt a cautious, fragile hope bloom in my chest. I had cast Vanessa as the villain, but the reality was far more complex. And in this unexpected alliance, I saw the first possibility that something real and true might be salvaged from the wreckage.